Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We have a number of people in the room as well as people online, and we're very, very excited to present the program today with two distinguished speakers from Anti-Cruelty, which has been a leader in the field of humane education and prevention of cruelty to animals for over 125 years, as I understand it. Before we get into the program, I'd like to give a couple thanks. I'd like to thank the Associate Director of the DePaul Center for Animal Law, Brett Davinger. I'm Meg Livingston, by the way. I'm the Faculty Director of the DePaul Center for Animal Law. And I want to take a moment to recognize the Andrew E. Buslik Endowed Award, which is providing generous support for today's program. The fund was established in honor of Andrew Buslik, a DePaul Law student whose love and compassion for animals was evident from an early age. In honoring his life, the fund celebrates outstanding student achievement in animal law and supports programs like this that bring us together to engage with important issues in the field. We are grateful to Andrew's parents, Mark and Sarah, who created this fund and whose generosity continues to make these opportunities possible. Our speakers today are Danielle Case and Emily Clem. Danielle is an animal welfare leader with more than a decade of experience working at the intersection of shelter operations, organizational leadership, and community-centered services. Danielle's approach to animal welfare emphasizes not only protecting animals, but also supporting the people and communities connected to them. Emily Clem is a certified animal welfare administrator who currently serves as the Vice President of Operations for Anti-Cruelty. Prior to Anti-Cruelty, she was the CEO of the South Suburban Humane Society in Madison, Illinois for 17 years. Please join me in welcoming Danielle and Emily.
Thank you all so much for being here. We're actually really interested in who is in the room and who is here, and really excited to be here. So, I mean, I know the crowd at home is a little bit larger. It looks like we are ticking up there to like 20s, 30s, but here, who is represented here? Who are we speaking to? Are you all students or in the career?
I'm a practicing lawyer. I don't do animal law. I'm just an animal lover.
Wonderful.
I practice in injury law. So, but anything to do with animals always really interests me.
Okay. Awesome.
Same.
Yeah. Same.
Yeah, same.
Same.
Yeah, my name is Lajana. I'm an insurance defense litigator. And
we actually have a
section that might interest you.
Yes.
But I consider myself an animal liberationist and an abolitionist and vegan for over 25 years. So it's an issue that's very close to my heart.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you. Anybody back there?
I work at DePaul,
Hi.
and I love coming to all these events.
Amazing. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Well, we're going to start off by just kind of covering the base data that we're looking at, just to get us kind of all on the same page and talking about the same things. So kind of us again. So like I said, we're going to start with shelter population, flow, and health. Then we're going to dive into veterinary clinics and access to care. And then we're going to dive into insurance considerations. We would love to hear your feedback on that part of it too. And then we'll go a little bit more into legislative policy and bills in progress currently this year. So, shelter data trends. So the data that I'm going to show you is from a group called Shelter Animals Count, and they are kind of the go-to group for collecting data from animal welfare organizations all across the nation, so that we can look at the trends overall in animal welfare. And so when this essentially is in comparison from 2016 to 2025, and we are showing this because we wanted to see before COVID, through COVID, after COVID, because it's very important because it affected our field drastically, as it affected everything drastically. So as you can see, national intakes year over year are down from previous to COVID. So that's something that seemingly is good, that we want to see intakes of animals going down. And then outcomes are also down. And so that makes sense, right? We have intakes going down, outcomes going down. All of that makes sense. So that follows each other. But when we get into the data a little bit more closely, we are going to break things down by adoptions. And that's where things start to get a little bit more difficult for our field. So cat adoptions actually have been sustaining and even have increased after COVID. I think that for some reason we had like a cat explosion and everybody loves to Instagram their cats. And
so if I could just speak a little bit more to that. So when I entered the field, it was 2007, and all we,
did I do that?
oh, sorry. All we ever did was talk about cats. Like we just cats. Cats were the issue. We were inundated with cats. And so to now be in a place where many shelters, not all, but many of us are experiencing even higher adoption rates than the national average. So we have been in a position for the first time ever where we go to shelters who are struggling to pull in cats. That was never the case before. For the most part, cats were, they never got transferred. It was only dogs that were being transported shelter to shelter. So I do think Danielle is right. I think it has a lot to do with COVID sort of reset people's expectations of home and travel. And so cats are easier than dogs, and they're particularly easier in an urban environment. So I think that's part of what we're seeing here.
And I will mention one shift that happened in animal welfare along the way here is there was a huge effort for community cats. So any cats that you're seeing outside, that's feral cats, that's owned cats that are allowed to go outside, and that's lost cats. That encompasses all of those cats. And there was a huge shift to leave them where they are unless they're severely hurt or injured. And what that did was stop the intake, the massive intake of cats coming into the shelter, and left them outside with if they were thriving. And most of them are. And there's a lot of debate in the field about that still, about whether we should leave them outside and whether that should be best practice. But at least for the shelters, I will not speak for the bird groups and everybody, but at least for the shelters, that has served us quite a bit because it has allowed them to thrive where they are. It also allows those owners who let their cats out for a day keep their cats because somebody's not picking them up and taking them to the shelter. Once you pick them up and take them to the shelter, their chances of getting back home are reduced to nearly zero.
Mm-hmm.
So now take a look at dogs. Unfortunately, dogs did not follow the same trend. After COVID, dogs dipped and never came back. So we all shelters across the nation are struggling with dogs, especially large dogs. And there's multiple reasons for that. We'll kind of cover a lot of those here. But I think, to Emily's point about traveling after COVID, it's harder to travel when you have a large dog. Putting a large dog in a kennel for, over week care, overnight care is a lot more expensive. The economy has suffered since COVID, and the prices of veterinary costs have gone up, which has caused a lot of people, I think, not to take in large dogs. Anything to add there?
Yeah, the other thing I would add, this graph isn't totally reflective, but we also know that in 2020, a lot of people acquired dogs. Many from shelters, like we were empty. Many shelters were empty of dogs. It was the craziest time in animal welfare, but many from other sources. So a lot of people bought dogs from breeders, from pet stores. And, again, I think that's a large part due to what was happening in the world. Dogs are comfort. They are a companion. So I think it helped people feel a sense of purpose, when the world seemed very in upheaval. So what that meant is if a lot of people acquired dogs in 2020, then fewer are going to be looking in 21, 22, and 23 because we had a household saturation. So that's also a piece of it that I think we don't take into account as much. And I just, because we have a lot of different folks on the call and in the room, I also just want to target anyone who heard that there was this mass return of dogs post-pandemic. That's not true. It didn't happen. There was one clickbait story that came out from the UK, one of their tabloids. Suddenly that got repeated and repeated and repeated, and it was repeated by the New York Times. No one in Chicago reported that that was true. Were there adoption returns? Yes, because there are always adoption returns. But we did not see this mass, now work is back in, things are back open, people are returning the pets. The data just doesn't show that, and our own organizations didn't show that.
You can see that in our intake data
Yes.
just a few slides back. We would have seen this massively increase if we did have that return, and we just didn't. Something else you mentioned when we were talking the other day is that I think one thing that did come out of COVID is that people did adopt a lot of dogs. And then during that time, though, we are all not socializing, and neither are the dogs.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we see coming in now are dogs with a lot of behavior concerns that are severely under-socialized or just didn't really get the training and the work that they should have because they weren't being taken out, to meet other people, meet other dogs, play outside as much. So those things just weren't happening, I think, in COVID, or at least that's my kind of understanding or the story that I think is true. And so I think that also affected things greatly here. Okay, so we're going to go into some more data here, but before we do this, I want to keep this in mind about the data. Data can tell any story that we want it to tell, and so I want to make sure that we understand that across the US, rental housing is 20 to 50 pounds, and the data that we're about to see actually measures dogs that 60 pounds and under is considered medium or small, and then 60 pounds and over is considered large. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So this does not really reflect that, though, because a lot of the housing market and the rental market does not consider or considers essentially 20 to 50 pounds a large dog. And what this data that I'm about to show you shows that 60 pounds is a large dog. So we're far off from like really kind of recognizing the issue as far as like rentals and things like that. The average restriction reported is around 45 pounds for rental restrictions. So the other thing that we need to consider here with the population and shelter flow is length of stay. So length of stay is probably the metric that we in shelters focus on more than anything else. Once they get in, the prerogative is to get them out as soon as possible, because as soon as they hit around 10 to 15 days, disease or infection or sickness, illness can come in or can play a part. And then once those animals are sick, you have new animals coming in. The older animals that are sitting there then waiting for and receiving treatment then infect other animals. And so we have this kind of cyclical and snowball effect that we don't want to have. And so the name of the game is get them out as soon as possible, get them into homes as soon as possible or to their outcome. So the trend of length of stay, as you can see, the orange is 2024 and the blue is 2025, has decreased slightly, but not enough since 2024. And I will also say that I think 2024 is when we experienced a pretty significant increase in length of stay, just because it was like after COVID and we were starting to get back to the regular groove of things in animal welfare. So as you can see, though, these numbers aren't really going down enough. And with large dogs, we are at 17 days, but that's for 60 pounds and over. That doesn't account for this 14 days, which is probably actually a little bit more considering those two things put together.
So what this data really tells us is that even though intakes are not showing themselves to be as high as we think they are, they are still at a pretty even level, but animals are staying with us longer. So if we're not drastically increasing outcomes, then what happens is all the shelters are full. So that's why you see the headlines about Chicago Animal Care and Control being at capacity. Name a shelter nationwide. You see the headlines that we're at capacity. It's because even though not necessarily a lot more are coming in, they're staying with us longer because it's taking them longer to find a home. So that's what's leading to the capacity crisis.
Yes. And this is essentially just another way of kind of breaking down the data so you can kind of look at it a little bit more centered towards the types of shelters that we're talking about. So government shelters are going to be like your typical Chicago Animal Care and Control, what has been previously known as the Pound, that kind of shelter. Shelters with a contract is referring to shelters that have a contract with the government, municipal organizations or company or shelters that they're pulling from them. And so they have a contract that they have to pull so many animals or that they have to take all of their strays or something like that, whatever is written into their contracts. Private shelters, that's like Anti-Cruelty. We are privately owned and operated. And then rescues. Rescues are usually the smaller organizations that don't have a brick and mortar. Some of them do, but usually they're foster based. And so they're putting all of their animals that they have out into foster as soon as they get them in. So like I was saying, the effect of the length of stay really has such a deep impact on shelters in a really bad way. And it's not only just disease that comes from that and illness. You do have in the field massive amounts of burnout from staff, just trying to keep up with the population. And then also just seeing animals decline as they sit there. The staff really, really has a hard time when they go into a field to do the best that they can for an animal and for animals in the field, and they can't do anything else because nobody's taking that animal home. And really, animals are not meant to be in the shelter. They're meant to be in homes. And then the other thing that we see, which I think this is something that isn't really considered as much from people not in the animal welfare field, but we might have to get to a point where we shut down our intake. And we've had to do that several times in the past couple of years because of the amount of population. So when we do that, though, the resources for the community are decreased. And so when the resources for the community are decreased, they have nowhere to take their animals. And, I know that there's a lot of thoughts out there about the community and how well or how not so well they take care of their animals. But, anecdotally, what we're seeing is that people are struggling a lot. They can't afford the vet bills that are increasing every year. They can't afford to, do the basic care. And so it's kind of snowballing for them as well. And so when they can't afford those things, they may result to letting their animal go or giving it to a neighbor or giving it to a friend, which is great. We really encourage people rehoming on their own. But sometimes that means that there's more animals out loose into the community. And for dogs, that becomes a public safety issue. We've had several instances across the nation of people being attacked by dogs and sometimes killed. And so this is something that affects every single one of us, whether you care about animals or not. It's a public safety issue, and it's something that I take very seriously. I know Emily takes very seriously as something that we have to really be cognizant of to keep our community safe.
Mm-hmm. The only other piece of length of stay that I want to touch on is the behavioral component. And so again, I think it's something, that really sort of hits home for a lot of people, that even in the best shelters, dogs are out of their kennel, their confinement, maybe 2 hours a day, maybe 2 hours out of the 24. That's in the best of shelters. Most shelters don't have the capacity to get them out more than 2 times a day for a walk. So think about if you were in an 8x4 confined area with barking all around you, what that might do to your mental health. And that's what happens to dogs. So the longer that they are in our care, the more many of them begin to mentally deteriorate. And we do the best that we can. So many shelters do such incredible work with enrichment and play groups and walks and the incredible work that the volunteers give to our shelters. And it's still not the same. It's still a challenge. So homes are always going to be better. Foster homes are better than the shelter. It's one of the reasons we've been focusing so much on foster homes as an industry over the last 10 years. So behavior is definitely a strong component that leads to that problem with length of stay. And it's why we talk about length of stay so much in our field.
Yeah. Something she mentioned about behavior is the barking constantly. When you walk into a shelter, or especially a dog room in a shelter, it's incredibly loud. We provide our staff with earbuds so that they can actually, you know, have some sanity and not constantly have dogs barking in their ears. But the dogs themselves, you know, if you can imagine, our sleep is incredibly important to us. We need it to rejuvenate and to become better. I have my Aura ring that now I track my sleep, which is really fun, and I'm kind of obsessed with it. So I think, you know, what we're seeing with the dogs is like if they are constantly surrounded by this barking, they never go into that deep sleep that they need. And that really builds up over time and becomes incredibly detrimental to their health. And that's when the stress, the illness kicks in. So one thing that we did at Anti-Cruelty, I'm no longer there, by the way, but one thing we did when I was there was we instituted a nap time, a quiet time. Nobody's allowed in the rooms. The lights are turned off. The window shades are pulled down. After we clean and before we open to the public, we just allow for quiet time for their brains to shut down for a second and to just relax. We wish we could do it more there, but you know, part of the name of the game is balancing their well-being, but also trying to get them out of the shelter. So that's another component to that behavior thing, not just getting out of the kennels, but getting that rest and that sleep. All right, so I wanted to just briefly mention Illinois stats at a glance. And really from a bird's eye point of view, Illinois is doing pretty well with their intakes and their outcomes. As you can see, the community live outcomes are just slightly above the community intakes, which that usually has to do with the buildup from the year before that is still residing in the shelter. So we do data month by month, but then collect it for the year at the end of the year. So that's why that kind of doesn't match. So yeah, do you have anything else to say about this part of it?
No, I mean, we're this is covering the number, so I can't quite. One of the things that is happening in Illinois, though, that this doesn't quite tell you the story of, is that we are seeing a decline in the number of shelters and rescue groups. There's a number here that tells you how many shelters and rescue groups there are in the state of Illinois. It is declining. Which is something we're really paying attention to at Anti-Cruelty. What does that mean? Are groups closing because of lack of resources? We know that just as the veterinary expenses impact owners, they impact rescue groups who maybe don't have an in-house veterinarian. Our volunteers declining, you know, we're really, not only us, but our state federation, the Illinois Animal Welfare Federation, is really looking at that and trying to figure out what is that number telling us so that we can try to get ahead of what might be happening.
Yeah. And so that is kind of the overall data. Before we go on to the next part of things, does anybody have any questions about the data? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's really about the data, but I'm interested in what is there anything being done to kind of like stigmatize people that go to breeders and things like that? Like I know like in California, a lot of people like just look down upon people that go to breeders and don't go to a shelter to rescue an animal to, you know, adopt and not shop. Mm-hmm. I feel like in Illinois, people are getting away with just like it's okay to go to a breeder when obviously it's not.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. So there's a lot of factors there. We went through this period, I think, as a country where you're right, like adopt, don't shop was a refrain and it was seen very widely. And I think particularly millennials and Gen X, it was, well, you go to a shelter. You wouldn't think about buying a pet. What we're seeing is that is trending down with the younger generations. So young millennials and Gen Z, we're losing that market share. And we spend hours talking about this. Like in the industry, we try to figure out how are we excluding this generation? What are we saying in our marketing that is causing them to turn away from shelters? We don't have all the answers yet. But one of the things that the industry has been doing to address this issue is opening up our process. So when I first got into the field, my joke was like, you had to be the Queen of England to adopt a dog from a shelter, And particularly at my own shelter that I was hired to be the CEO at, I didn't fit the adoption criteria because both my now ex-husband and I worked. And that was an automatic decline if both people worked in the home. So, we have a decades-long history of that, of not welcoming people in and meeting people where they're at. So we're turning that around. I mean, almost every shelter has embraced this, but we still have a ways to go. So I think more than anything, that's the message to the community. If you were a kid and you went with your parents to the shelter and you were denied an adoption, we're not that shelter anymore. Come back and give us a try. And that's what our marketing has to be. We're here for you. We're a part of the community and we need you. Like you are who is going to save these lives, with us. So, and I think you'll see that if you look at our anti-cruelty marketing, I think you'll see that like open, friendly, all are welcome, philosophy. We all have to be embracing that to overcome that.
Thank you.
Across the country, are stringent standards common, uncommon? Are there particular states that are particularly difficult?
That's a good question too. As an industry, we've all embraced this idea that we have to be more open. So I don't think you can say particular regions where the restrictions are more stringent. I would say that perhaps in some of our more rural communities, they still utilize some of those stricter ways to evaluate adopters. But that's not always the case either. There are many progressive rural communities. So it's really organization by organization, philosophy by philosophy. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would say that too. And then you have, like the larger organizations, I think that they've really had a lot of drive to open up adoptions and make things more fluid. And I think that, for smaller organizations that may not, it might be their second job to actually have a rescue, that might not be their prerogative. Their prerogative might be very different. But for us in the industry that has these large rescue or these large groups, it's essential. There's even, a trend of websites where you can kind of just pick and choose the kind of animals you want, the breed, the color, what it acts like, what it looks like, supposedly. I mean, let's not get too crazy. What it acts like can, is a little bit ambiguous from buying one online. And then they'll deliver that animal to your door. And so we are at a time when our industry and the legacy and the longevity of our industry is very much at risk if we don't scale ourselves up to meet that kind of need. And so we have to think about, yes, safety of animals, but when you look at the data, people that are coming into shelters to adopt animals, by just the initiative to come to a shelter, they are already taking that step to want to do something good and want to do something right, because they could really sit at home and pick out the animal that they want through drop-down menus. And so we really, really want to I want to emphasize how important it is to just like spread the word, please, that we are open to people coming adopting, and we really want to make it easy for people.
We can and have presented whole presentations together about this philosophy. So we'll stop after this comment because we're very passionate about this. But I will say the other piece of having, because people do have a lot of concerns about open adoptions and adopters welcome, right? Like, well, aren't the people going to abuse the animal, or, you know, all of these concerns. One of the beautiful things of open adoptions and doing adopters welcome philosophies is that you're actually building a relationship with that adopter in front of you, because instead of them walking in and feeling immediately judged by everything, by their appearance, by their income, by their children, their house, whatever, you're saying like, hey, tell us about yourself. And so then when that adopter needs help, when that adopter is struggling to pay for vet bills, struggling to feed their pet, they feel like they can call us for help. And then we can be that safety net for them instead of having them bring the animal back. So we really create that longer relationship by being welcoming. Yes. Off my soapbox.
I'm sorry, I have one more.
Yeah, sure.
Regarding the veterinary costs that have escalated, what do you all know about? I've heard that veterinarians have become like, or there's been these corporations that have like taken over vet offices, and it's like just profit driven completely, and it's really scary for the animals and people.
Yes.
And they're people and they're humans.
It might be the next slide.
It might be the next slide, yes.
Okay.
So I will actually take that. Thank you.
Okay.
It's almost like you were planted there for that reason to say that. I will take that as a segue. It's not just an animal welfare issue. It's public health, housing, workforce, market structure, administrative law. And that takes us to access to care in private veterinary clinics.
Yeah. So literally exactly what you just said. So this is happening very much in Chicago, in the state of Illinois, across the country. We have a few, I would say a dozen of these corporate veterinary practices. And I don't want to name names, but I think you all can envision a couple of them that are picking up all of these family-owned practices. So veterinarian who may have started his practice in 1970 now is ready to retire and is selling to these corporate entities. And so then that's exactly the model. The model is volume. So they're pushing production. It's what it's called. It's the base of like whatever the cost is plus whatever they upsell you on. And I do want to definitely take this moment to say veterinarians deserve to be well paid. They are professionals who have gone through school. They are lifesavers. They have lots of debt. Most of them did not get into this for the money. They got into it because they love animals. So not any of this is an indictment of veterinarians and their need and desire and should make money. But this is what's happening. And so we have these corporate vets that can pay retention and bonuses. They are offering to pay off their debt if they sign early. We have been finding that some of these corporate vet entities are recruiting at year one in vet school, and they're signing folks before they even know what they really want to do. But I mean, you can imagine that if someone's offering you this money and it's going to really help you not be in debt, that you would take that. So on top of what we just described, right, we also do have a workforce gap. So there have historically, for many, many years, we have not graduated out enough veterinarians to meet the demand. So as pet ownership has risen, vet numbers have stayed the same. So you have veteran vets that are retiring, and we don't have enough graduating to replace those ones that are retiring. COVID recurring theme, made things so much worse because a lot of veterinarians who were sort of on the cusp of retirement said, I'm out, I'm going to retire early. And then the other really just hard thing that you have to talk about is in the customer service industry, COVID and post-COVID have made things very difficult. People are exceedingly more difficult when they come in to deal with customer service. So a lot of veterinarians have just said, I love the animals, but I don't want to deal with the people anymore. We've experienced that across the country and here in Chicago. So we are projected to have a shortage of 10 to 15% by 2030. And that's a lot, like that's very significant when you think about the numbers. Hardest hit sectors, shelter medicine. So veterinarians that are choosing to work in municipal or private shelters, rural communities. Probably one of the most significant things that is happening is the lack of access to veterinary care in our rural communities. There might be one vet in 100 miles in some of these communities. So you not only have the shelter overpopulation, but you don't have the vets that can actually care for these pets. And then there are huge, we call them animal welfare deserts in low-income urban areas. So in Chicago, Englewood, for example, Austin, the Roseland community, we have all of these lower income sections of Chicago that have no access to vet care. There's nowhere for people to take their pets. I mentioned the customer service, but it's a field of high burnout and compassion fatigue. It's for veterinarians, it's one of the only fields where you can be there from the birth of your client to the end of life and to actually be performing that end of life. And that weighs very heavily on people who have chosen this field because they love animals. It's also compassion fatigue to stand in front of an owner and for that owner to not be able to pay for the services, right? Like they're not greedy people. They want to help the animal, but their own cost of insurance, their own cost of inputs have risen. So there's so many factors that go into that. It is one of the workforces with one of the highest suicide rates, veterinarians. Cases are increasingly complex because owners increasingly want to save their pet. So we're treating things that we've never treated before, across the industry. And then the limited pipeline into the profession. We don't have enough vet schools to meet the demand. There are vet schools opening, and they're just not admitting enough students at this point. And this is the conversation is being had. I mean, the AVMA, ISVMA, like everyone is looking at this and trying to figure out what can be done.
On top of the limited pipeline into the profession, the pipeline into the shelter medicine profession is even more limited, which is a very different kind of scope of medicine when you're thinking about it, because, the private veterinarians are focused on the animal in front of them. And so they will, do whatever they can to work with that animal's health and provide care for that animal's health, whereas shelter population is a little bit more crowd health and crowd mentality there. So it's a different way of thinking a little bit when you're thinking of shelter medicine, and that's an extremely limited offering in schools.
Yes. And then, we have it here. So we've been funding retention, but not the pipeline. So while we're handling, all these retention incentives, higher wages, signing bonuses, we're not doing veterinary scholarships, debt relief programs, diversity pathways. This is a very big thing. I think the last statistic is that 4% of doctors of veterinary medicine are people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color. So, that's a huge gap. Like it's one of the biggest in any professional industry. And we have to do better at introducing that as a career pathway to students and providing additional support for those students to go through the program. This is getting better, but it's still not good enough. We now have very dedicated shelter medicine pathways. A lot of schools, the University of Illinois has a dedicated shelter medicine track that students who are interested can follow. We actually have welcome externs from the University of Illinois at Anti-Cruelty so that they can hands-on learn shelter medicine. But this has not historically been even introduced to vet students as an option. So we're behind the curve on that. Simply put, shelters can't compete. So I'll tell a personal anecdote from my previous shelter. We were hiring a veterinarian who we really liked. We were an interview and he was going to come in. The last minute, a corporate vet came in and offered him an $80,000 signing bonus.
Oh my God.
And he said, can you match that? I didn't laugh, but no. I think our signing bonus was $5,000 that we were offering. So, this is what's happening. Like we can't compete. This is the retention average per associate. We're well into the 160 at the 3 associate level. So those are not salaries that most shelters can compete with. And again, go make your money. but it means that we have a pretty deep gap in people to fill open shelter medicine positions. If you go to any of our industry job websites, you will see dozens of openings for veterinarians across the country at all shelters.
It's a great field to go into. So
Anyone's looking for a second act.
yes. Or if their kids are
Yes.
they're a little lost, that's a good thing to push them into.
So this is all building to, all of this is putting increased pressure on pet owners. Spending is expected to increase 3 to 4% per year beyond inflation for the next 8 to 10 years. The demand grew 15% for vet care. And since 2022, the lifetime cost to care for a dog increased by 11.65% and cat by 19.4%. Those are very significant numbers. I mean, everyone in the room identified as a pet lover. I'm sure most of our Zoom friends are pet lovers. Think about your last vet bill. If you took your pet to the vet, I don't walk out of there for under $300 just for, something basic. And most people living paycheck to paycheck, which is most Americans, can't cover even a minor emergency that might happen with their pet, let alone an actual, veterinary emergency. Just to walk in the door at a veterinary emergency center is $250. I mean, and that's on the low end, and that's just to walk in the door. So we have a crisis for pet owners, and we have to keep talking about it so people understand just what is happening to people in our communities. So this is what happens when vet care becomes unaffordable. 1 in 4 pet owners delay care. So what might have been, and I have so many examples of this from my time running an access to care clinic. What was a dog that fell and scraped its leg, and it could have just been a couple of stitches and an antibiotic, turns into an infection that is now in the bone, and the dog loses the leg. That's the best case scenario. Whereas if they had $300 to be able to go to the vet, they could have avoided that. So we're skipping vaccines. So this is where shelters and municipal organizations are filling that gap by doing low cost to free vaccine clinics. You've seen an explosion of that across our industry. Cook County does 40 a year?
Yeah, quite a few.
45, 50. Cook County does a lot of them. They partner with shelters to provide free vaccines. Anti-Cruelty does 11 wellness fairs per year. We physically go out into the community, into Roseland, into Pilsen, into wherever, partner with the aldermen and the park district. And we vaccinate and do exams for 75 plus dogs on a given Saturday. Because we're all trying to fill this gap of the preventative care being skipped because a vaccine that it costs us about $3 can prevent all of these diseases from happening if they just have access to the vaccines. You see chronic conditions worsen, that emergency care we just talked about, and that's easily 3 to 5 times preventative care. I have a dog who just likes to cost me a lot of money. And so I know firsthand, like the cost of those emergency veterinarians. So we'll pause on the access to care.
Do a time check too.
It's a 4:45.
Okay, great.
We were breaking at 5.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So just any questions about access to care or veterinary shortage? Anywhere?
Anything online? For everybody at home, we have somebody watching online questions. So if you have any, put them in the chat. I think I forgot to say that in the beginning. I'm so sorry.
Okay, then we will move on to my favorite topic, insurance. It is an actual crisis in animal welfare, the insurance challenge that we are facing. Liability claims are rising. Insurance payouts related to animal incidents have increased 110% over the past decade. And so what does this mean? It means that carriers don't want to cover animal shelters. We are a high risk. We are essentially in as high of a risk as adjusters take a look at animal shelters as construction companies, which construction companies are historically the highest risk to insure. So some have closed entirely. We have some carriers that we could rely on that would cover us. They're not even doing animal shelters at all anymore. They've closed that line of business. And then if you can find one that will cover you, the premiums have gone triple, quadruple, 10 times, 11 times. Speaking from personal experience at my previous shelter, we were paying about $45,000 for liability insurance a year. And that's just liability. That's just general liability. That's not health insurance, officers and directors. That's none of those other lines that you have to carry. We had a couple of lawsuits, animals that had been adopted out that had bitten, and our insurance went to $300,000 from where, and that's from the only one that we could find to cover us. You have to carry general liability. If you can't find a carrier to write for you, you go into essentially it's an assigned risk pool. And you pay incredible premiums then from Lloyd's of London or, some of these like big, massive carriers. So this is actually one of the reasons shelters are shutting down, rescue groups are shutting down across the country because they can't afford the costs of insurance. So here's some statistics on claims and payouts. The average claim has increased by 48%. In Illinois, the average claim is 6 figures on a dog bite. So we're trending to 7 figures very rapidly. And there have been a couple of high-profile incidents that I don't know if you've seen in the news. Most recently, there was a $5 million verdict awarded to a woman in California who had adopted a dog from a rescue group. The court found not only the rescue group liable for the bite, but they also found the person who transported the dog from the shelter to the rescue group and the shelter liable. So all 3 were liable. Each have a part of that $5 million that they have to pay out. This has tremendous implications for our industry because we already have had a view towards public safety and trying to ensure that we are placing safe animals in our community. And dogs are unpredictable. You certainly can have a dog that you think has passed any assessment, has been good with the shelter care team, and then gets in a home and bites. And then all of a sudden you have a 7 million, a 7-figure claim against you. So it's a very challenging time trying to figure out where do we go from here. what you're going to see is some bills, and when we get to the legislative section, that are trying to address some of this. I don't know if that's the right approach. Again, this is a topic we talk about all the time. Where animal shelters have our own association. It's called the Association for Animal Welfare Advancement. That's our professional association. AWA spends a lot of time talking about this and figuring out, recommendations of this carrier, that carrier. We're all, sharing information as we can, but if these trends continue, you will continue to see more and more headlines and more shelters who can't keep up with the costs of insurance.
What's the theory of liability if the shelter has fully vetted the dog and done a behavioral analysis, and then you adopt out and 6 months later the dog bites the owner? How do you trace that back to the shelter?
Yeah. So it's a great question. What we're seeing is that if anything has been documented that might have been seen as a predictor, because again, dogs are dogs. So in one specific case, right, there was a dog that in the shelter record had nipped at the sleeve of a shelter care worker. Didn't break skin. It was disclosed to the adopter, like, hey, we just want to let you know, like the dog did jump up and do this. Shelter found liable because that was a predictor of aggression. Is it? So we waiver the heck out of everything. We have an adoption contract that they sign that says, I will hold everyone harmless, right? We have a behavior waiver that we present to someone. So if the dog has so much as even snarled when you tried to take its food away, like we disclose that to adopters. But still these claims are breaking through. So to me, it's an incredibly interesting legal question, to pose to our lawyers of, well, what is happening and what can we do to mitigate risk? I mean, we're mitigating risk all the time. Like my team gets so tired of me saying mitigating risk. And we have a Zoom friend saying it's depressing that someone would sue a shelter. It's happening all the time.
And sometimes, I guess there's two things I want to say, to that comment specifically, we are seeing that some of the bites or attacks that come from these incidents can be egregious. Not all of them, but they can be pretty bad, life-altering to a person. And so in that sense, I totally get it. They do need coverage for what they went through and how things have changed in their lives. On a kind of different note, I also wanted to add, there's like this, if we think back to, the owners that are bringing their dogs to the shelter that went through COVID, that haven't received that training, haven't received that socialization that they need. Compound that on the extended length of stay. We have a very, I don't say this to put shelters in a predicament, because I want people to adopt from shelters and I want people to trust shelters, but we have to make a lot of difficult decisions about the animals that we put out into the community. And I will say that on top of that, as we all know, I think here in the room, there's also that pressure for that euthanasia, that live release rate that, there's always this pushback about euthanasia of animals. So I do want to say that I think that it's this really difficult decision for shelters because they are being pushed in that direction to make those decisions more for the safety of the community, for insurance. And so if I have a platform to say that and to ask people for understanding, it would be to ask people for understanding about euthanasia decisions that nobody that I've ever known in animal welfare in any animal field has ever gone into the field because they want to euthanize animals. It's kind of the downside of our field is having to make those decisions, and it's becoming harder and harder as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thank you so much. And I would add that there are some groups that are not disclosing that history. And I think that's one of the factors here. So we all have to be committed to transparency for us to be able to continue to have the trust of the community and to try to change these trends.
Well, it's almost incentivizing not to keep records. You know, don't record that bite, don't record that nip, because then if there's discovery, you could say, oh, the dog had a clean record. I don't know.
That's something a lawyer can say.
That's a very lawyer perspective. Internally, we very much encourage, like, if anything happens ever, it needs to be documented. And yes, that does kind of, I get that point of view. Then it kind of hurts us in the long run.
Yeah.
But if we don't know about it, we can't do anything about it. And so it could get worse. It could, the behavior could increase. Or if it comes out that nothing was documented and something happened, then like that, I think that's also a liability for us, that it wasn't documented and we weren't documenting properly.
Right.
How many are euthanized?
Nationwide?
Yeah, or what percentage of the intake?
Yeah. So nationwide, I think we're at about 600,000 a year are euthanized, which percentage of intake puts us a little over 10% as a country, about 10%.
Is that
Which,
just dogs or?
no, that would be all of them, dogs and cats. You know, you're looking at a situation where in the 80s, there were 16 million euthanized a year. So we have gotten so much better as an industry. That's the role of spay neuter for sure. There's so many fewer coming in. Many organizations are only euthanizing, like Anti-Cruelty. We euthanize for untreatable health issues that we can't solve, or behavior that we think is a risk to our community and a safety risk. We don't euthanize for space or time. Most shelters don't anymore. Some are in the position of having to do that. And again, like, that is not the shelter's choice to do that. Yeah, those are more the municipal organizations that are completely over capacity and have nowhere for those incoming pets to go. So I think that's a really important message for people to understand, is, again, like, the euthanasia choices that are being made in so many cases are health and behavior.
I take it that the bigger dogs are euthanized more than the smaller ones.
Yes. The number one intake dog into our shelters is the pit bull type dog, whatever we want to call that. And the number one euthanized is the pit bull type dog. Now, some of that is a matter of numbers.
Yeah, it's just, if you have the most of those, that
Right.
tends to be what you euthanize
Right.
the most.
But there are also supply and demand issues there as well. You have more coming in, but there is less of a, like you saw in the length of stay numbers, if we get in a Shih Tzu, that dog is gone. That dog is adopted within 2 to 3 days. If we get a blocky-headed pit bull type dog, it sits there so much longer. So its euthanasia risks increase because of its behavior challenges.
How effective have the waivers been?
So in my experience, waivers have been effective in some cases. Like, we have been able to point to, you sign this waiver, this is your signature, and it has ended before it's even gone, to any litigation. But any lawyer that I've ever talked to has said, you got to have the waivers, but just know they're not going to hold up. So how effective are they? I think we have to do them, but also knowing that a good lawyer can bust through.
I don't know, they're pretty effective in my field, I
Okay.
have to say. I mean, if we find out that a client signed a waiver, we're like, oh crap, and then it opens up a whole other area, and we've had a couple cases that have survive them, but it's not easy. So I would think if they're drafted correctly, they
Yeah.
should.
Maybe
Well-
talking to her about drafting the waivers better.
We always have our legal team review any waiver, so hopefully.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, because, we're all good lawyers at my firm and we have trouble with them on that.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So, I should have noted this earlier. So one of the challenges that we're seeing with the waiver is, so if the adopted dog bites the adopter signed the waiver. But say the owner has the adopted dog at a family barbecue and it bites cousin Mary.
Right,
Cousin Mary didn't sign the waiver.
right. No, that makes sense.
So, you know, the insurance companies are trying to do is say, well, then the homeowner's insurance is responsible for that incident. But then somehow it's getting, you know, sent back to the shelter or the rescue group. So,
Yeah,
You might also want an indemnification signed, whereas, right?
Yeah,
Where you would be the owner would be indemnifying the shelter if there was a lawsuit filed against you,
we
then.
have that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We have an indemnification clause in the actual contract. I was here.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, my question about volunteers, have you seen volunteers in any of these cases get involved or like named in these lawsuits? And in turn, does that affect volunteers' willingness to work with shelters?
Yeah, I can't speak for everyone. I will say in my two organizations that I've been affiliated with, we've never had a volunteer engaged in one of those. So some foster issues, but again, the liability of that was wholly assumed by the organization because the animal is not owned by the foster. So I don't think it has an impact upon volunteer.
Say that's our experience at least.
One question online, then we can take a break.
Yeah.
Is euthanasia based on overcrowding based on region of the country, like rural versus urban?
I'd say yes, a little bit and by type of shelter. So in the South, I know that the South definitely struggles a lot with their animal intake and having a lot of a heavy population. But on top of that, there's the type of shelter you're working with. So for instance, Chicago Animal Care and Control, they have to be open admission. They have to take the animals that people bring to them as a service to the city. And so they are going to struggle so much more than private shelters with all of that kind of stuff. The length of stay, because like I said before, that snowball effect starts happening a lot quicker with open admission shelters. Anti-Cruelty chooses to be an open admission shelter. We don't have to be, but we choose to be because we know it's the right thing for our community and the right thing for our city, because Chicago Animal Care and Control is standing out there on its own, doing that by itself. And so we choose to be for that reason. So we, are kind of a partner with them because of that. Anything to add to that?
Nope, that's what I think.
Is this a good spot to take a break?
Yes.
Or-
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
We do have another question online. Sorry.
Go for it.
Do dog trainers ever volunteer to work with the dogs that have behavioral issues?
Yes, we get some offers. It's not as many as we would need to really make that work from a volunteer perspective. But it's definitely something that, most shelters, including Anti-Cruelty, would welcome if there were trainers that wanted to volunteer. We do have in the industry, there's a lot of different training styles and a lot of different methods. And so, we are a shelter that is a fear-free shelter and positive training only shelter. So, we would, of course, not want to partner with a trainer that uses aversive techniques or, something along those lines. So that would be the only, I think, detractor. But yeah, that's definitely, if trainers would continue to offer services, that could be something that helps to make a difference.
Something Anti-Cruelty has invested in the past 2-3 years is actually training our behavior team in like how to become a trainer and helping them get the hours, because you need to log so many of the hands-on hours with animals, and so it's kind of a perfect win-win. The more they know, the better it is, and then we help them kind of get their certification, and so that's something that has been, I think, really beneficial.
Yeah, we now have 2 CPDTKA.
Okay, yeah.
A lot of initials.
I can remember all of them and what they
Yes.
stand for. but-
Certified Professional Dog Trainer, KA. So we're proud to have the two of them. So continuing, just finishing up insurance. Of course, insurance is also driving housing policies. So we have, across the city, across the country, you have landlords that are citing liability insurance policies for restricting certain dogs. Most common are breed exclusions, weight limits, and dangerous dog lists. So this is very common. I have been looking to move to the city for the last year since I got the job at Anti-Cruelty. And I have just been astounded at rental exclusions and the whole list of breeds that they exclude. And, your dog and cat combined weight has to be under a certain amount. So it's definitely affects renters a lot as well. Dangerous dog lists, for those that might not be familiar, the county and a municipal authority, city has policies in place to deem an animal dangerous. That is more broad than you might think. It can be a bite. It can also be multiple times that the animal has come into animal control. So, any animal that has that obviously would be excluded from a lot of renters' policies. So what this means, is that we're in a city where we have a lot of renters. It's really challenging for people to adopt or to have a dog.
And this was something I actually didn't even consider, because the housing stuff has been such a battle cry for animal welfare, for animal shelters for so long, is like release these limitations that you're putting on renters. But I didn't even consider the insurance side, about how the insurance is probably pressuring the landlords as well, in that way too. Yeah.
And as we look at the insurance and we look at risk and mitigation, the CDC data is something that, of course, we know people are going to take a look at, and it does show an increase in dog bite fatalities. It is still a low number at 983 compared to the number of dogs that exist in the United States, which is 40 million, 60 million, something like that. Of course, that's not a completely proven statistic. That's based on survey data, et cetera. But if we continue these trends, the industry is going to keep responding by assigning risk.
So essentially, it's all cyclical. It all, again, back down to the snowflake or the snowball effect. Economy concerns, which we kind of started off with, informs access to care, informs shelter population, informs public safety, informs insurance, and it kind of keeps on going. The path is upstream, and there's a lot of groups out there that are working to secure these things, which is really great. The shelter support, like medical funds for owned pets. The shelters are definitely in a place where they are kind of the go-to for low-income pet care now, and so that pressure is being put on shelters to not only provide like the intake for the animals that are in their care, but also the care for the animals in the community for the community that can't afford it. Partnerships with local vets, policy advocacy, which we will actually go into next. Workforce, like we talked about with the veterinarian workforce, public safety, responsible adoptions, intake availability, public education, and then access to care, like we were discussing. Now, this is probably one that you all are going to be are very interested in. This is kind of the legislative policies that are on the table for 2026, or sometimes have been for a while. So keeping in mind with the legislative stuff, and I'm sure you all know this, that there's an unintended consequence with some of the legislation. So for instance, breed-specific legislation. I know that England just did a breed-specific legislation and found that the bite incidents in England aren't actually going down, even though they have a pit bull ban now. No-kill mandates, unintended goal, or the intended goal is to reduce euthanasia, but then we have longer lengths of stay and things like that. So anytime we make any kind of legislative policy, it does have other consequences. And so we're going to talk about this from the animal welfare point of view, but it's an open conversation. And so I think it's very fascinating to hear the other points of view, to kind of see how the world is thinking about it. As we've discussed here, all of these things are really affecting all of the legislation that's coming in. So insurance companies, landlords, private shelters, federal agencies, the veterinary licensing board, everybody has a say in it. And so you can imagine they all have different priorities. They all pull in different directions. And so it's a very difficult area to get stuff going with. So there's actually a very handy map on the Animal Association for Animal Welfare Advancement website. You do have to be a member, but to view it, I don't know, they just came out with it, so I'm not sure if they're going to ever make it public. But it's really handy because you can just click on the state and it gives you a list of all of the policies that are on the table for that year. So it's really great. As you can see, New York there has the most, the red is the most concentrated amount of legislative policies on the table. There's 823 currently across the US, 35 in Illinois. We're actually one of the highest right now. New York has the most. Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Illinois are leading in that.
And I would just point out, if you are engaged in animal welfare, you know that Texas has a lot of challenges. So it's very interesting that there are no policies pending for Texas.
Yeah, good point. I didn't even think of that. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna go just slide by slide on some of them that are up now in Illinois specifically. So if there's anybody on the call that is not from Illinois, I apologize. There is a point where we can kind of go through if anybody has questions about other states, and we can kind of click through other states too. So the first one is the pet shelter euthanasia ban. Kind of the big things to know is that it amends the Animal Welfare Act, and it's a little ambiguous. It clarifies that nothing in the act permits euthanizing a dog or cat or other pet in an animal shelter unless it complies with requirements under specific provisions of the Humane Euthanasia in Animal Shelter Act. Now, I will say, I even went back to the Humane Euthanasia and Animal Shelters Act because I'm a licensed technician, euthanasia technician. And so that's something that is incredibly ambiguous in that act as well. And so there's not a whole lot to go from there. And that's probably a little bit of the point, but the second thing to know is that it establishes that regardless of any other law, no person may euthanize a dog, cat, or other pet in the animal shelter unless the reason is health, attitude, or aggressiveness. Now, this seems clear, and it seems like a really good direction to go, but it does kind of take, these things aren't in this legislative policy, these things aren't defined. And so it's very unclear what aggressiveness, attitude, health reasons means. And as we've seen in the shelter, I think that it's a huge spectrum. Behavior is not aggressive or not aggressive. In fact, calling a dog aggressive in the behavior world is what are you talking about? Because it's so that could mean anything. And so that's another part that's a little bit iffy. And then updates the definition of humanely euthanized, specifies that, I think that's, in an animal shelter is not considered humane unless it's for those reasons. Then we can't really call it a humane euthanasia. Anything to add for that perspective?
No, I mean, I think again, you know, when you look at it, as Danielle said earlier, we know no one ever wants to euthanize any animal. But this actually does make it more vague. It doesn't give stronger parameters on anything. So it's not only is it going to cause further ambiguity, but I think people holding shelters against standards that are unclear is not helpful. It's not helpful in advancing life-saving or advancing the industry.
Is that actually the language used in there, like attitude issues? I mean, that.
Attitude issues is used in there,
It's
yes.
so vague, yeah, I mean, that's.
I mean, my dog has a lot of attitude. Like,
Her dog is a very grumpy old man.
very grumpy old man. Like that's not, you know, that's not a reason for euthanasia. So, yeah, it's very vague.
And I will say the industry doesn't, and this isn't speaking for everybody, this is speaking for a lot of shelters. I know that as best practice, they have a team of people that are determining euthanasia. And so it's not one person really that can decide on the euthanasia. I know that at Anti-Cruelty, we have the medical insight, we have foster insight, we have population and operations insight, we have behavior insight, we have foster insight, all sitting at the table to make those decisions and discuss those decisions. And so it's not, they don't go unchecked, at least at most shelters.
Right.
Again, I can't speak for all.
Some version of this has been kicking around for a couple of years now. So I think most of us don't think this has a chance of moving forward, but we just wanted to call everyone's attention.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
In Illinois, what, it's anti-cruelty and Chicago Animal Care and Control are the two that I know that are kill shelters, right? That kill.
Well, we don't accept that terminology because we're humanely euthanizing.
Right, but I mean, you don't understand my question. Which other ones are euthanizing?
Every shelter euthanizes.
Every shelter euthanizes?
Every shelter euthanizes. It's just how you are defining what how the intakes are coming in. So for example, we love and support our friends at Paws Chicago. If you look at their data, they have a euthanasia rate within their data because it's impossible to save 100% of every animal. But also Paws Chicago, again, whom I love, like they're doing incredible work in the city. They're picking and choosing who is coming in to their facility. So they have a much better chance at defining, you know, what they think is placeable for adoption versus, as Danielle was describing, Anti-Cruelty being open door, we're not turning away the 15-year-old pit bull with health issues that is coming in and needs support. So that's the definition. There's a lot of data that's open in the state of Illinois. The Department of Ag website has a lot of information on intakes and outcomes for shelters. Most shelters, including Anti-Cruelty, are committed to transparency. So we participate in Shelter Animals Count. So data is, you know, very widely available if you're curious about individual organizations.
The
By law, how is it done?
By euthanasia,
Yeah.
by injection.
By law.
By law, it's euthanasia by injection. So you have to have attended the Humane Euthanasia Act, specifies the training that has to be done, who is able to be licensed, the process for licensing, the types of drug. In Illinois, there used to be gas chambers. I mean, across the country, there used to be gas chambers. Those were outlawed a long time ago. So it is an injection that shuts the organs down, shuts the brain down.
It's a very peaceful,
Yes.
ending.
Most shelters, including Anti-Cruelty, do a two-step process. I don't know any shelter that doesn't. The first step is a sedation. So that's the fall to sleep portion. They fall asleep into, they're anesthetized essentially. And then the injection that is the euthanasia.
There is, I mean, I think in the industry and in the world, there's a lot of definitions and terms thrown around, and like, no kill is thrown around a lot versus kill shelters. And those there, I would urge everybody to look into them, because there's a lot of complexities there. And it's not as streamlined as it seems, or as simple as it seems. There's a lot going into that. And as Emily said, there's not a single shelter that I know of that hasn't had to euthanize. It's like saying that there's a private veterinarian that hasn't had to euthanize. I mean, every animal comes to an end in their life. And so that happens at shelters too. So that's one reason why the no-kill term is very, very complex. Yeah.
Just to follow up, what happens after how is the body disposed of?
Cremation.
Yeah, I can speak for Anti-Cruelty. It's every animal is cremated. If through our clinic, if it's an owner requested euthanasia, the animal's at the end of their life, the owner may request the remains back, but every shelter animal has death dignity and is afforded cremation.
And also, again, Anti-Cruelty, I just like to plug them because I'm very proud of all the work that they have done in the past several years. We've spent a lot of time on the kinds of drugs that we use for the sedative, that it's as easy on the body as possible. And so, and those dogs, the staff is in love with them, and they take good care and very passionate about, giving them all of their favorite foods, a big bowl of it. So they have a very lovely, peaceful end of life. And it's something that I took a lot of pride in when I was at Anti-Cruelty, and being part of, really helping to push that end of life process along to be as peaceful as possible.
Yeah. We actually recently just started the chocolate program as well, because chocolate is poisonous to dogs. And so any dog that has to be humanely euthanized gets chocolate right before, so that they can taste it one time before they go across the rainbow bridge.
They love it.
Yeah.
Okay, and this one is a little bit more about housing dog breeds in Illinois. So it puts some limitations on landlords refusing to rent to tenants that have specific kinds of dogs. It applies to residential housing with more than 3 units, so it does have a little bit of limitation there. And if a landlord violates those provisions, the tenant can request an investigation by Illinois Housing Authority. This is, so I believe the box is there, but I believe it's applicable to both renewals and to new tenants in a building. Yeah, I think that's the most, those are kind of just like qualifiers of that for the dangerous dog, vicious dog, and what the limitations are in the language.
So this is what we'd like to have passed. This could really help the animal crisis.
Especially in Chicago, we're downtown, Anti-Cruelty is downtown Chicago. And so a lot of the people, most of the people that are coming to us, they rent. So it's a significant loss of having, not having a bunch of renters that can't actually adopt larger dogs. This one is a little bit more, so we have a field service department at Anti-Cruelty, and so this is a little bit more geared towards the field service department. So, when we go out and do an investigation and find that, or a law enforcement does an investigation and arrests an owner of a companion animal, they typically had 15 days or 14 days, I believe, to decide whether there would be a seizure of the animal. And now that this would be extending it to 30 days. This seems like a really great law, and at face value, it's amazing. However, if we have had to hold animals several times at Anti-Cruelty for the period of time that the court is deciding upon that. And that sometimes goes on and on and on and on and on forever. And so that extension is problematic for shelters because, as we discussed, that length of stay continues to snowball. And so when we have a mandated length of stay, that becomes difficult for us to hold those animals.
And I think everybody can interpret, but forfeiture is forcing the owner then to sign the rights of the animal over to the shelter through the court.
And what is the arrest for? Like, that seems violating the owner's duties of what?
So it's the Illinois Animal Welfare Act, which Animal Control Act, that defines owner's duties. So owner's duties are food, water, shelter.
Okay.
But it also, encompasses abuse, neglect situations. So in there is the temperature. We have extreme temperature law in Illinois, so that's in owner's duties. It's difficult. Owner's duties can be very difficult to define. It's difficult for law enforcement. It's extremely difficult to get a conviction unless there is really powerful video evidence of something. There have been so many cases where we were certain the person was going to be convicted and they weren't, just because of the burden of proof.
The next one, this one would open up animal shelters, so that the public can view all of their rooms at all times and see all of the animals at all times. Which again, I am totally in support of transparency. That's one thing that Emily and I mean, like, transparent sometimes to a fault. And we at Anti-Cruelty, where they are actually moving towards a model of what is called open selection, so that if an animal hasn't, really made it to their vet visit yet or something, that they can come in and say, but I want that animal. And we'll say, great, we will move this forward tomorrow as fast as possible so that you can have that animal at the end of the day tomorrow. So that's something that is, taking precedent across the country, and a lot of shelters are doing it. It's a great model, especially considering the populations that we're seeing. This, however, would open up any room in the shelter. One issue that I have with this is that there are isolation rooms that require you to put on a cap, scrubs, a gown, booties, gloves before you go in there and touch anything. And then beyond that, touching anything, that's not even going to do everything it can to protect from you touching something. And then, you take your gloves off the wrong way. There's a very regimented way to take off PPE in which you're not exposing any of your skin. Obviously, we can't train that all to the public. And so this could very easily spread disease through our shelter. That's not even talking about zoonotic diseases that can spread to humans from animals, exposing people to zoonotic diseases that we experience in shelters. So this one, while I love the idea of open selection, this would be problematic for us.
And like we started off, Danielle started this legislation part off, things have unintended consequences. So you might wonder, why would this even be a thing that has come forward? So again, during COVID, right, there were a lot of restrictions put in place of who could go into the kennels. We were bringing animals up to meet visitors instead of people being able to view the animals in the kennels. And some shelters found that to be a very successful model going forward. And there's some thought behind that. So, if a stranger walks into the kennels, the dogs start barking. You're more often to transmit disease if you have a person, no matter how much you're trying to watch the visitor, who touches this cat and then touches this cat and then touches this cat, right? So the theory of it I get, right? But there's also a lot of research that if you don't allow visitors into the kennel, adoption rates go down because people want to make that connection. You know, you hear so often the stories from adopters like, oh, it picked me, you know? And so by preventing them from walking in the kennels, we may be lowering the number of adoptions. So my guess is that's where this came from, to encourage all shelters to allow people to walk into the kennels. But then it has these unintended consequences.
Yes, yes. Another reason for shelters to get involved with some of
Yes.
these things, because we could definitely do this in a different way, you know? Rabies vaccines. I'm actually going to let you take this one. I love it, but I know you are, it's your heart.
This is a really big one. So going back to our conversation around access to care and the veterinary shortage and preventative vaccines. So this bill, introduced by Representative Cassidy, actually has emerged from working with shelters in the Chicagoland Humane Coalition. So we've been working with Representative Cassidy and some others for a long time on putting this bill forward. So this would allow certified veterinary technicians in shelters to administer the rabies vaccine. So it would greatly increase the speed with which we can move animals through the shelter. Stray animals that come in that are, you know, the owner comes in to redeem it, but there's no proof of rabies vaccine, could just get it right out instead of waiting for a veterinarian. It's less of an issue for a place like Anti-Cruelty where we have several veterinarians, but it's a very big deal for some smaller shelters that may only have one veterinarian. And so there's nobody there on the weekends to inoculate for rabies. It mandates all kinds of things that it should, you know, proper storage, proper handling, training for the vet techs, all of those things. This is very opposed by the Illinois State Veterinary Medical Association. So we're currently, I say we, but I don't have anything to do with it. Our coalition team is actively with the representatives in conversation with the ISVMA to see how we could get them to being comfortable with this. If there is something in the language that we could change that would help them to get comfortable, because this would have a great impact upon shelters to be able to do this.
Another landlord and tenant one. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Do you know why the vets are opposing it? It seems like a rather simple thing.
Yeah, so their arguments are that veterinarians are the only ones that are properly certified, trained, professional enough to administer the rabies vaccine.
Is the rabies vaccine more complicated than other vaccines?
It is not.
Okay.
And vet techs do other vaccines
Yes.
all the time, and they're similar, very
Yes.
similar.
Like any vaccine, it has to be properly stored.
Oh.
You know, refrigeration is important. It can't be drawn up too far in advance. You know, you have to ensure the air bubble, all of those things. But again, like, it's not saying that I could go administer the rabies vaccine. It's saying certified veterinary technicians who have gone to school, who have been licensed, could administer it. So,
My guess would be that the implications, the possible challenges or outcomes of that are so much worse. You know, rabies is zoonotic, it can spread to humans. And so if something is missed or not given correctly, that could go very poorly. And so it could come back on the veterinarians who are licensed to train those people. And that's probably, I'm assuming that's probably where their concern is
yeah,
coming from.
I think that's a big part of it, which is why, again, like, we're open to what other clause then could we put in that would make you feel more comfortable with that? What other extra training or something along those lines?
Mhm. Another landlord tenant pet fees one. So this one actually limits the amount of pet fee that a landlord can charge a tenant for them renting with a pet. It limits the reoccurring and the non-refundable fees. And it also has a provision in that landlords may not charge a pet fee for or pet rent for an assistance animal. Yes, and then they have the limitations on the charges that can actually be asked for. And those seem pretty reasonable. They're astronomical now. I mean, like now per month, I think that, I've seen as much as 150 per pet per month. That's a parking spot in Chicago. So I know, and considering the economy, I know that's just, that means that, you hide your cat from your landlord. Which I won't say here, but I might have done before. And this is ending kind of on a happy one. Okay, thank you. This is ending on a happy one. We just declared that April 23rd is National Animal Welfare Day. And so I thought we would throw that one in there. That's a really good one to celebrate. It's coming around the corner.
Yes. And so our coalition partners are going to Springfield on the 23rd to meet with senators and representatives and just encourage them to continue to hold animal policy and animal issues at the forefront of what they're talking about. When you talk about healthy communities, that includes healthy pets.
What's bovine tailing? What is that?
I'm not a livestock person.
That's a great question. Anybody online know what that is? Bovine tailing?
There is food here though.
Oh, it's a question. I'm not sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, so there's apparently an issue with scheduling where this room was supposed to be booked for a class, but it was never on the calendar. So I never got a rejection, so we kind of need to wrap it up.
Oh,
Yeah, no problem. I think we're at the end.
yes, we are at the end. And then I can put in the chat real quick if anybody else has any questions, or I'm on LinkedIn. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Danielle Case, danielle.case@gmail.com. I'm more than happy to talk more about all of this stuff.
And if you email at anticruelty.org, they'll forward it along to me, but I'm also eklehm@anticruelty.org.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.